Okay, we're going to try to produce some libraries so that we can reduce the amount of code. There's quite a lot of code and we're repeating a lot of code. So for example, we're repeating the same sort of structure: response fail, response message, echo JSON encode here. So response fail, response message, the same thing is happening throughout my program. So I sort of want to take that and just have one function which does it, and pass in the different variables that we are going to look at. So I'm actually looking at the wrong file now. It's add location, but it's the same thing. So these three lines are repeated throughout, okay, and I can probably do a better job than have them there. So and there as well. Also, I'm going to keep all my database stuff. So if I open person file, open the add person, I'm defining that in add person. I'm defining it in add location, and I'm using the same lines here, connection. That's in both files, and that's really a waste of time. Let's close that one down because it's getting in the way. We can close that one there, so I've only got these two open. We're using the same lines of code over and over again, and it would be better if I sort of just had them in a file, just declared them once, so I can use them in my program. So if I need to make any changes, I'm only changing them in one place, not all over the place. So I'm going to do that, and to begin with, I'm going to create a new file. I'm going to save that as db.php for all my database activity. I'm also going to create another file called library. I could just choose file save as lib.php for a library. So I'm going to have a load of routines, library routines in here, and I'm going to have database routines in my db.php. So the first thing I need to do is say that it's a PHP file, and then I'm going to copy across these details. In fact, I'm going to cut them so they're gone. Paste them inside here. So there we go. I've taken them from there. What I can also do is just cut them from add person. Now, although I've cut them, I still need to be able to use them, and at the moment this will not see either the lib or the db PHP file. I've got to tell it that these two files exist. I'm going to start with the db PHP, and I'm going to add them to each of my files. So underneath the PHP declaration at the top, I'm going to type in include, and in speech marks the name of the file, db.php. So now that can access that information, and I'm going to do the same in my add person, include db.php. So, oops, I need to have that in quotes. So that is now accessing the information that I've just stored away in here. But I can't just have it like this. I really need a function to call. So I'm going to define a function. I'm going to call it run query. Doesn't really matter what I call it. And I'm going to pass in some variables. I'll deal with those later. But now I've got one function which, when it's called, will start off all the database information. So what other database information do I need to take? I need to take this connection. So the database connection. So if I cut it from there and paste it back in here inside the function. So I've now got my connection, and also I want to take what happens if there is no connection. I'm going to get an error message, so I'm going to take that piece of code as well. Let's cut it and paste it back in here. There we go. So I've taken pretty much all my database information. The one thing that I want to do is, once it's made the connection, remember it's going to set up the database here, so we know what the password is, the username. Then it's going to make the connection. Here it's going to check if the connection is successful. It's going to come down to this line here. Okay, so that's where the next line of code is. If there is no connection, so in other words, if I've got an incorrect password or something, it's going to give me a message in JSON, and it's going to quit the entire program at this point. Okay, so it's just going to die. It's going to kill it off at that point and not perform any further tasks. What I need to do is manage the situation here when it's successful. And if it's successful, if you remember, what we did was let's just copy this one. We had the result. Okay, this actually runs the query, MySQL query, connection query, and stores the value in result. So I'm going to put that as my next line of code here. So now I've got my result. The problem is that in add location I'm going to deal with the result here, and actually I should cut that out. I'm going to deal with the result here, but I don't have any result being passed back to the actual program. So here I've got to deal with two things. First of all, I've got to return the result back to the program once I've got what it is, and then the program add location or add person can deal with it. But I've got connection here, set up connection there, and I've used connection there, and I've got connection here, so they're all in the same scope, they're all inside run query. However, I don't have a query, so what I need to do is pass in the query as a parameter here. Okay, so now I've got the query. So if I typed in here run query, for example, run query, and then send in the query, that's me passing the parameter into here, and it's being used here to run the query, and then there's a whatever the result is returned back to the calling program as a result. But I also need to, because this is the calling program and it's going to return it, it's a function, I need to set result here equal to run the query. So that takes care basically of the database side. I've got one or two bits more that I can tidy up. So I really want to tidy up all of this message here at the same time as tidying up these messages here. But before I do that, I'm going to make the same change that I've done in add location to add person. So number one, we don't need that line anymore. We don't need that line anymore. We don't need that line anymore. But we do need that line. So I'm going to copy that, paste that underneath. There we go. So that has tidied up some of this code. It looks okay. Now to deal with this, and I'm going to use a little trick. I'm not going to keep typing these in. This is hard coding, and hard coding is fairly bad. So I want to try and take out some of this hard coding so it doesn't exist. Now, I've got this library function here, and in this library function I'm going to do that. So again, this is a PHP file. Ooh, better if I actually do it properly. It's a PHP file, and I'm going to create a variable. I'm going to create an array, and there's a special kind of array called an associative array, which I've probably mentioned before. And I'm going to call it message. So what this array is going to do is it's going to hold these values here as a message. And it's associative because it's going to associate it with a key value pair. So this is the value, I need the key. And if we think about this one here is when the data is added, so a useful key would be added. So I'm going to make the array message equals an array, and I'm going to give it a load of key value pairs. So the first one that I just mentioned was added. So if I have the key added and then a special symbol, oops, outside of that, which is the equal sign and the greater than sign, which means that what's following this is the actual string. So if I copy that string there, paste that in my library there, so I've got the key added. So wherever I use added, it's going to replace added with the value, and I can do that for all of my messages. So what messages do I have? I've got data was rejected, so a good key would be rejected, and I separate them with a comma. Oh, I also need to put a semicolon on the end, otherwise we'll get a problem. So I separate them with a comma. So let's line them up correctly. Oops. So the next one could be rejected, and the value for that is the data was rejected. And I can build up an array of messages that I can use, and all will become clear shortly. So let's do another one. If we go back down to here, what is in just about every file in add person, we've got this one. There's a coding error, a parameter has not been set, and here there's a coding error, a parameter has not been set. So that seems to be a good one. So if I call that parameters, that's my lib, another key, parameters, and wherever I got parameters, I'm going to be using that message. So let's take that out. Put it in my library. So I'm building up an array of error messages. It would be if I was putting them in properly. And I can keep doing that. Every time I need a word, I can replace my original messages with now a very simple line, which is just a message and its array value. So, for example, let me change these to be what they are. So, instead of doing message equals that, I can now do response message. I think this was parameters, which sort of tidies up the messaging side. So I can do the same with this one. Equals message. I'm just looking down here. I've taken the message out of there. I've got to keep the message in there. I'm making a pig's ear of this one. Message equals, that's better, message parameters. I've got one too many blocks there. Sorry about that. I'm getting a little ahead of myself there. So I can do the same with data was rejected, message equals, instead of data was rejected, I can now do message rejected. And instead of that, I can do a message added. So I'm reducing the code again. The reason why I was sort of hesitant there was because actually I don't want these lines anyway. I want to replace them with a function so that I can pass the 0 and I can pass the message to a function and make that work. So I'm going to go back to my library and I'm going to create a JSON function, my own JSON function. So beneath here I'm going to declare a function and I'm going to call it JSON message. And what this is going to do is just be all of these 3 lines. So basically if I just copy those, paste them into there, I've got roughly what I want for my coding. But each time I call JSON message, I want to set the parameters so that I'm not hard coding these. So what I'm going to do is just type some sort of variable. So S for success, or I can actually put success in there. And I can have the message as well. So I'm sending in the success value and the message. So now I don't need to have the 0 there. I just put the success, which is going to be replaced with whatever value is passed in there, and the same goes for this one. I'm just going to have message is much tidier. Then it's going to encode it and print out the response. So that is basically my function for my JSON. So how does that affect what I'm doing? I'm going to be calling this with the 2 parameters, success and message. So let's go back and I'll show you what I mean. So instead of having these 3 lines, I'm just going to replace it with one simple call, which is going to be JSON message. And I've just deleted that, so let me just undo it because I need to know what the message is. It's 0 and parameters. Let's type that again. JSON underscore message, and I'm going to pass in 0 and parameters. Oops. And that's tidied that up. But I can't just pass in parameters because that's the string parameters. I've got to type in the actual variable, which is message parameters. So that will now go back to here, and it will find the key parameters, and it should return there was a coding error. It's not been set. So let's continue that here. We've got another one here where we've got a 0 and either latitude or longitude field was not completed. So let's handle this one. First of all, I'm going to have a key for these two. I think I'm going to call that lat long. So another key here, lat long, and the message. Sorry about rushing, but I've got a feeling I'm going to be thrown out of the building very shortly. So if I just pinch that, that's Control exit, paste that in there. Mistake on the end of there, no comma. Don't forget to put the commas on the end, otherwise you will get a mistake. I'm going to save that. And so now I can do exactly the same that I've done here, JSON message. And I'm just going to type it straight after that. I'm not going to get rid of those yet. I need them. So that's going to be 0 for the success. So I can get rid of that. And the message equals lat long. So that's the key. It's going to find the message, and I don't need those two anymore. So that shortened that. I can do the same here. A little harder to do because I'm setting up the success and the message here, but I'm actually calling the result here. So I really need to think about that a little harder. At the moment, I'm just going to leave that, and we'll come back to that one shortly. What I do need to do though is to go into add person and do exactly the same there. So I'm going to control save that. Now I can just copy that message and in add person, just paste that in there. I can do the same with this one, but this one this time is the first name or the last name wasn't completed, so I'm going to give that another key pair value. So I'm going to call this one names, and I'm going to copy those details. Into my library. Make sure I've got a comma separating it. Everything seems fine at the moment. Go back to add person. Now I can just use this one again. Set parameters, names. And we are really shortening the file. As you notice, it's really diminishing in size. Probably becoming more easy to read as well. What I do need to do though, because in this library, let's just save it. In this library, I need to be able to access this message and this function. So I need to say in both of these to include the library, lib lib.php, and again in add person I need to do the same thing, include lib.php. Now the order of these actually matters because I'm going to be doing things in the database one. If we can see, we've got the same things here. Okay, connection to database failed. So again, in the library, I need a key value pair, which is going to say this one. Let me copy this now and go back to my library, and I have another line called connection. I'll paste that in there. Connection to the database failed. And in here, I can take these lines out, but notice that the die had as a parameter JSON encode response. We didn't need to have it in there. We could have had that there, and it would do exactly the same thing. So it would say that we failed, and give us the reason why we failed, echo it out as a JSON response, and then die. But I just passed it as a parameter. But if we represent it like this one, then we've got exactly the same that we had in add person. So we've got this JSON message that we can use here. So if I replace that with that, it's a fail, so I need to do connection to pick up the string from there. Now I made that incredibly tidy. We've got one or two more things to do. Let's save these files. Now what I was saying is that in DB, because we are using this JSON message, and that JSON message is declared in here, in the lib, we may have to include that file in there. May have to. We're talking about scope, so I will explain that in the next video. So I will show you how all of this fits together and how it works.